Hello and welcome to Thursday's Gospel Meditation video. Thanks for watching these videos this week. I hope you're able to get stuck into the story and find yourself feeling like you're more in this place than, Enfield for wherever you live for this week. Thursday is a huge day in our Passion Week story. It's the day where Jesus has his final supper, the Last Supper. It's the day where he's arrested and it's his last moments of freedom before the cross. And all four Gospels tell us so many things about these stories, and it's a place in the story where all four of them really start to line up in a way where the details are shared across each of them. There are some differences again, and we're going to look at some of those. The main difference that we're going to read today is that John's account of the Last Supper is incredibly detailed compared to Matthew, Mark and Luke's. It's so detailed that this week I had to research and make sure that John's version of the Last Supper was actually the Last Supper, because I thought it must have been a separate dinner based on the amount of things that happen in here that aren't recorded in the other ones. But in all these things, I always love reading the book of John because I think the details that he goes into and the angle that he approaches is always really different to the others. And we're going to look at some scriptures from a bunch of the ones here today anyway, but I want to start by mentioning what some of the similarities are between the four and what some of the differences are. In all four of the gospel accounts, we see that Judas is identified as Jesus' betrayer at this Last Supper tonight. But each way that it's done, it's always done very subtly so that the disciples don't really know what's going on. And in the book of John, we see that John himself was leaning on Jesus' chest, and as Jesus is saying, one of you is going to betray me tonight, Peter says to John, who is it? Who's going to do it? Ask the teacher. So John asks Jesus, and Jesus says, to whoever I give this piece of bread once I've dipped it will betray me. And sure enough, he takes some bread, dips it, gives it to Judas. The other Gospels, they only show that Jesus says someone is going to betray me, and it says that he took some bread, dipped it and gave it to him. But we don't find out in those other ones that Peter and John are now in the knowledge of what's going on. And it makes sense to know that Peter and John figured what was going on, because as we read more of the story about Jesus getting arrested, these are the two characters that we see continually pop up as Jesus is arrested. And even at the cross as well, we see that John was actually at the cross. So that's the first thing I want to point out from this. The other thing about John is that he squeezes so many incredible teachings into the Last Supper that are completely not mentioned in the others, that it baffles me. We've got Jesus washing the disciples' feet. We've got Jesus speaking about being the way, the truth and the life, that there are many rooms in my Father's house and that he goes to prepare them. We have the whole illustration of the vine and the branches. We have the whole message about the Holy Spirit being given. Interestingly, John doesn't talk about the Lord's Supper. John doesn't go into the whole idea of communion, whereas the other three do. But each one of these stories is this result of the disciples coming together for a last meal, Judas being identified as the betrayer, Judas leaving the group of people, and then Jesus and his disciples leaving this place and going out to the Garden of Gethsemane for this final prayer gathering, this final time together before Jesus is to be arrested. And as we look at these stories, I want you to put yourself in these moments, knowing that Jesus' meal with these people is his last time gathering together with them. What was going through Jesus' head? I mean, this is the last time, as far as we can tell, Jesus even ate a meal. And he says this in, he says this when he was doing the Lord's Supper. He says, I'm not going to drink of this wine again, in some ways. And, I think there's a deeper meaning to what he's saying there. But as far as we know, Jesus wasn't going to be eating another meal on his free will again from this moment. But as we look at this, I want us to really concentrate on John when it comes to some of these things. But the last thing in John that I want to look at before we take this story and go into the garden is John 17. Now, John 17 is one of my favorite chapters of the Bible. The whole chapter is just red text. It's just the words of Jesus. It's just him talking, and more specifically praying to the Father in these moments. And as Jesus is praying in John 17, it's his final prayer that he prays before being arrested. And he prays the prayer in three ways. He prays about himself and the situation that he's in. He prays for the disciples who he sat with in that moment. And then he prays for the believers who are going to come to follow him as a result of what was going to happen on that night. And as we see that prayer for the believers and even for the disciples, we can take this prayer and know that Jesus in that moment 2,000 years ago was praying for us. He knew your name. He knew that you were going to say yes to him, that you'd become a disciple. And the prayer that he prays here is a prayer that he's praying for you. So I want you to really concentrate your reading today on John 17 and look at what Jesus is saying to you. What is he asking the Father about your life in this moment? Because it was true then and it's true right now. And it says here in John that once he prayed these things, Jesus left with his disciples this upper room where they were gathered together for this final meal, and they went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, the Garden of Gethsemane to me is one of the strongest images we could ever imagine in the Bible. There's something about gardens that we always see in the scriptures. In Revelation, it shows this garden and the tree of life in it. In Genesis, we've got the Garden of Eden where Adam and Eve are placed. And right here in the middle of those two events, we've got the Garden of Gethsemane. And I want to pick up the story of Gethsemane in the book of Luke here, because Luke documents one of my favorite moments from this story. Whenever I read this story and I see the part about Jesus talking to his disciples and saying, "Stay up, watch and pray with me," and they're all falling asleep, it's something that always bums me out really to read that story, because I see it and I see, like, I can feel what that must have been like for the disciples in my own life, where you're trying to stay awake for something and you keep falling asleep and you can't help it. It's something I get in trouble over a lot. Some late night drives, like you get sleepy behind the wheel and you're like, I can't sleep right now. And these guys, it's like they didn't understand the importance of what was going on. And Jesus is getting, like, he's saddened by the fact that these closest people around him won't stay awake with him in this dark moment for him. But the moment I want to focus on from Luke is, I'm just going to look at Luke 22 verse 39 up to 46, and we're mainly just going to look at one of the prayers Jesus says during this moment. It says this: Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. This is after the dinner, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you'll not fall into temptation." This story stands out to me so much because of this prayer that Jesus prays there. We know that he was so going through it in this moment. He sweated blood, which is insane. But it says this: "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." That prayer is a prayer to me that defines what it means to be a Christian. Jesus was not afraid to pray what he was feeling in his flesh in that moment to the Father. He was, he said, "God, if this trial can be taken away from me, if this moment, if there's another way of doing this, Lord, would you do it? But above that request, let your will be done instead of mine." And that to me is so much of what it means to be a Christian today, that we're not afraid to come to God with our honesty of what we're going through in a moment, but that we always make sure that we give God permission to do with our lives what we want to do. And I think heaven must be filled with people who say, "Not my will, but your will be done," because in heaven, God's will is done perfectly, and that's what makes heaven heaven. That's why there is no lying, there is no cheating, there is no sickness, there's no brokenness. Because no one else's will is being done in heaven. The Father's will is being done perfectly. On the earth, however, we live in this place where our will is being done and not the Father's will. That's why our world is all these broken things, because we do what we want to do, not what is the right thing to do. And Jesus exercises here this perfect demonstration of, if we want to make the earth look like heaven, then we have to be people who say, "Not my will be done, but yours." And in Jesus being obedient to what the Father was asking of him, he went to the cross, bought us for our ransom, paid the cost of our sins, and brought us into union with God in a way that we could never have done by ourselves. And if you parallel this with the other most famous garden given to us in the Bible, the Garden of Eden, we see Adam and Eve in a really similar situation where God has told them something that they're supposed to do. And in that moment, instead of letting the Father's will be done, they've decided to let their own will be done. And as a result of them having their own will be done, destruction came to all of humanity. Sin entered the world and terrible things happened. And it's like in this moment, Jesus won back that garden again. Jesus didn't do what Adam and Eve did, but Jesus won back like God's will for the earth and taught us that even if we're going through the toughest trial of our life, with God's strength, we can still pull through and do God's will instead of our will. And to me, I know heaven is going to be filled with the kind of people who say, not my will be done, but yours be done, Lord. And above all of these different things and prayers, I want you to catch this glimpse in this Garden of Gethsemane, that this is Jesus's final moments of free will on the earth. These were the final times where he was in control of his movements. These were the final times he walked without chains around him. And I want you to think about what this moment must have been like. You see, Jesus, the Eternal One, sat at the Father's side, has known that this moment was going to come, has known that he's had a mission trip to earth planned forever. And in this moment, Jesus has been on the earth for 33 years or so. And these are his last moments as a free man before he comes back in his glorified body after the cross. What was going through Jesus's mind as he saw the moon in the sky for the last time? What was going through Jesus's mind as he walked through the beauty of a garden for the last time? What was going through him as he saw all of these things? And in the link to the video today, I'm going to put in a link to the video, one of the videos that we made for the Easter production a couple of years ago, which was filmed in Enfield, but just goes through a garden at night. And to me, it really sums up like a lot of what these feelings must have been like. So I'll put that in the description box of this video. But there's so much here to dig into. And, you know, from this moment, Jesus is then approached by a huge group of soldiers and people who work for the high priest, with Judas Iscariot at the front of them. And Judas greets Jesus with a kiss and greets him as if nothing's going on. But we know that this sign was the sign that Judas gave to the people, that the one who I kiss is the one you are to arrest. And Jesus is arrested, and immediately a confrontation begins where the disciples want to fight for their master, and Jesus doesn't let them do it. It's the beginning of the lamb being led to the slaughter, and Jesus doesn't resist, he doesn't fight back, and he goes with it. And from here, Jesus is taken to the high priest's house, and he's mocked and ridiculed by the people who are given to teach his very law in this. And I think back to the story that we've read this week. I think it was Tuesday's, one of the stories from Tuesday, where Jesus gives the parable of the vineyard, where there's a master who has a vineyard, and the vineyard is lent out to all these people, and the people destroy the vineyard and they abuse it and do all these terrible things. And so Jesus sends one of his, the master in the story sends one of his servants to the vineyard to come in and to sort it out and to collect what belongs to him, and they kill that person. And that's representing the prophets that go in. The story says he sends more and more people over and over again. And after all these people get murdered, the master of the vineyard says, I know, I'll send my son, they'll respect my son. And so he sends his son to the vineyard to collect what belongs to him and to put things in the right order. And they kill the son as well. And that story comes alive to me as I see this moment as Jesus being taken into the house of the high priest, being taken into the presence of the people who were told to look after this vineyard. And they're not respecting the son that was sent to them to set things right, but they arrest the son, they beat the son, they mock the son, and they eventually have the son murdered because they want to carry on doing their wrong things instead of doing their right things. What was Jesus going through in this moment as he sees his Father's house being the place of his own trial, as he sees this place that he was sent to rescue turn their backs on him? Remember, a few days ago the people shouted, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And now Jesus is being shouted at and arrested in the same city that he was welcomed in as a hero a few days earlier. Read these scriptures that we put on the screen today and take some extra time to read this story, because there's so much stuff that's going on here, and this is such a big story. And I know today's video is probably quite a long one, but as we enter into this point now, we're really into the most important moments of Jesus's life and what happens in Passion Week. So I hope that these stories can come alive for you today. I hope you can find some time and space to get into these stories, and maybe as a bonus challenge, if it's not breaking your self-isolation rules, something I like to do a lot in life is I like to go out for walks at night time. I find that at night I go out and I pray really easily and things just seem to make sense and feel really peaceful. Maybe tonight, as your challenge, I don't know when you'll be watching this video, maybe if you're doing this with your family, want to go out together, or if you want to go out alone, go for a quick walk around your neighborhood in the dark. Look at the sky, look at the moon, and imagine what it was like for Jesus to be out on this final night of his life, and you know, be safe and stuff like that. But use this practical way of getting into the zone to imagine what those moments would have been like as you go out from your house for a little bit and walk around like that. But I pray all this blesses you, and I pray that you really get stuck into the story. So thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you again tomorrow in Friday's video.